With only a few weeks left until the launch of the Hogwarts Legacy game, the buzz and excitement around this title is building to crazy levels. Although the game does look incredible with lots of work going into this title from Avalanche Software, the marketing team kind of let their side down. What am I talking about? Of course I'm talking about the Collector's Edition. Although the digital portion of this content does seem pretty good, such as giving you early access to the game with an extra 72 hours early access, additional robes and quests, and also a steelbook. But there's a but, and here's a big but with the Collector's Edition. The plastic book that is hooked up to a USB cable is rather underwhelming, especially considering the floating wand. Even the guy promoting the product is finding it really hard to find things exciting to talk about this unboxing and this product. I would highly recommend that you watch this cringe fest on YouTube. A floating wand can be purchased pretty cheaply off Amazon for around $20, and for this set they're asking for $300, which is ridiculous in my mind. So I set myself a challenge. Can I make something more compelling and make better use of a wand than what Hogwarts marketing team could come up with? Well, I went out and I purchased an old school desk, exactly like the one you would find in Hogwarts, with the hole that I guess you would use for old ink pots. And of course the top of the desk does lift up so you have a compartment to store things. I'm sure kids from the 1920s used to store invisibility cloaks and the Philosopher's Stone in there. That gave me an idea. What if I could use that space to build a gaming PC? A gaming PC that can play Hogwarts Legacy. So the first job is really to figure out where am I going to put everything. You may not think it, but yeah, it is going to be a bit of a tight squeeze. By the time you try and fit the intake and exhaust fans, the motherboard, the graphics card, the power supply, the hard drive, and not to mention where you're going to put all the cable management, and really how I'm going to space everything out. So what I did was I marked out the locations and holes that I wanted to cut, and I then mocked up what I'm going to be putting inside the table, including the motherboard and some of the supports and shrouds that I'll be placing inside the particular case. Then also mocking up the bottom of the PC also. So I proceeded to start hacking away at this historical desk by first drilling out the corners of the square sections that I marked out inside the desk, then using a jigsaw to cut those shapes out using the holes that I drilled. For long straight sections I decided to use my circular saw, and just a note here, please don't copy what I'm doing, it's very dangerous, you have to be extremely careful. However, the circular saw gave me some nice straight edges. Moving forwards, however, I think I'm going to have to invest in a good quality router tool. Once all the hacking was done, I needed to clean up all the corners and all the sections with my Dremel, and I used a sanding bit to tidy all of those up the best that I could. Now it was time to use some nice black varnish inside the table to give it a bit of a modern look when you open it up. With the black varnish applied, I think it makes it look very professional and it looks pretty awesome in my opinion. Now it's time to figure out where am I going to put this power supply and the AO cooler. The cooler itself was an unusual size, it was actually 140mm, whereas most AO coolers come in the 120mm variant. So, with me thinking I've got loads of space at the bottom of the desk, I completely messed this up and drilled in more holes than I originally intended to put into this desk. In the end, I still managed to get the power supply and the AO cooler to fit, ensuring there was some clearance between the bottom of the desk and the radiator of the AO cooler. This ensures that air can be drawn from the top of the radiator down through the fans and away from the desk. Now it was time to figure out how I'm going to fit these fans for exhaust and intake for the PC case. What I did was I 3D printed some mounts for where the exhaust and intake fans were going to be placed, and these simply screwed directly into the table and the fans into the mount itself. I also made sure that there was some filters in place to try and reduce some of the dust build-up within the desk. Once that was done, I managed to tidy up the dodgy looking hole I cut in the middle of the table. This was where my 3D printer came to rescue again, and I printed an insert that slid really nicely into that hole. In addition to that, I printed my channel logo, Retro Mod, and I think it looks pretty awesome on that little insert. And thanks to my dryer for my 3D printer, the print quality came out amazing. And if anyone has a 3D printer, I highly recommend using a dryer to improve your print quality. Next, I 3D printed some mounts, and those mounts will be used to mount the motherboard onto, so it has a little bit of height so the bottom of the motherboard is not touching the desk. Again, these were fairly easy to screw in place into the desk since it was going into wood, and I just used standard wood screws. What I didn't realise about the fans is that the LEDs only come on when you have the PC booted up, and you have to have the fan software running, which is a little frustrating, however still should look pretty good when turned on. I then drilled the holes for the switches I wanted to mount on the front of the desk. Originally I was going to have 4, but then I decided to reduce this to 3. And what I did in the end, by hiding the 4th hole, was use a little, should I say, creative masking, which I'll show you later. There was going to be one switch to turn off all the fans, so you can put the desk into a quiet mode. The next button is to turn on and off the Harry Potter hologram. And finally, the last switch is the most incredible one. Well, actually, it's only the reset button. Now it's time to sort out the hologram thingy. The lockbox looks pretty cool, and Harry Potter looks pretty compelling there, waving his wand around. But it's time to unbox this amazing piece of technology and pull it apart. First of all, I removed the stand, which was easier said than done because the nuts inside would rotate with the bolt, meaning the bolt would not come out. Then it was a case of removing the top cover and pretty much snipping away at everything, only leaving the positive and negative wire for the LED light. I also snipped away some of the housing so that there'll be more clearance for this to fit inside underneath the desk, and also for cable management behind the LED light. Finally, I printed a bracket for the hologram light thingy to be mounted too. I now needed to make an on-off switch for the PC, and this is where the wand comes into effect. I used a reed switch and wired this to 2 wires that would connect to the corresponding points on the motherboard to turn the PC on. I also wired in a LED flickering light. You can get this off eBay or Amazon, and basically it's a simple diode that has a resistor soldered onto it. I also fitted that into the same hole so that it would act as an indicator so you know the PC is on when the lid is closed. So instead of doing what most normal people would do and go out and buy a Harry Potter wand, I decided to print my own on my printer. Once it was printed and I assembled the wand together, I then drilled a 4mm hole on the end of the wand using my vise, and then I inserted the magnet. And the magnet will be used to click the reed switch so that the PC would turn on and off. Finally, it was time to install the motherboard, and with that I installed a 120GB M.2 drive, and I swapped the Xeon processor for an i7 5820K. I mounted this CPU into an X99 ASRock motherboard, and the RAM that I used was not a fancy RAM, it was just a 2166 MHz 32GB. So I think I'm going to have to upgrade the RAM next time I come round to doing the benchmark video. The next job was to wire in all the wires for the 4 fans into the hub, and also the LED lights that will be mounted onto the bottom of the desk. Then wiring all the power connections to the motherboard was the next job, and also adding the USB connections for the hub for the fans, and also the on-off reset switch and all the other ancillary connections. Finally, I mounted the I/O cooler onto the CPU, and using a PCIe extension cable to connect the GPU since it cannot be connected in the standard configuration. The reason for this is the GPU is slightly too tall for the top of the desk, and therefore the lid wouldn't close. So I needed to fit the GPU somehow, and actually I used the front of the desk to put 2 screws through, but before I needed that I needed to have some offset away from the edge of the desk, and what I did, I used TPU again, and I printed 2 TPU buffers to fit between the GPU bracket and the front of the desk, and I put the 2 screws through and then mounted the GPU into the GPU bracket. Finally, it was time to switch the PC on, and unfortunately I discovered my CPU was running at 105 degrees Celsius. An absolute disaster. I couldn't believe it when I had finally put this all together. And what I found out was that my AIO cooler had leaked. This goes back to my shoddy implementation in the beginning, and I should have really taken more time and care in terms of planning out the bottom of the desk, even though I thought actually it wouldn't be looked at that much. Meaning it was time for me to bin the AIO cooler, the 140mm that I had. Now I needed to almost completely tear down this PC again, relocate the power supply and get a new AIO cooler. For this I got a 240mm AIO cooler, double rad, twin fans, and actually this fitted much better than the original 140mm AIO did in the beginning. But in this case I decided to do this properly. So what I did is I 3D printed standoffs or mounts made from TPU, which is a rubbery type of material, and I used long bolts to attach the AIO cooler at the bottom of the PC. I routed the cooler itself much closer to the CPU so that the tubes didn't have so far to travel in terms of being from one side of the desk to the other, and that way it meant the route to the CPU was much shorter. The other thing I did was I instead installed the power supply next to the small hole that I created, and I ran all the power cables and all the ancillary wires through that hole, and it gave a nice tidy finish. Now it was time to install the 4 house emblems onto the front of the desk. I managed to find this off Thingiverse. I 3D printed them, and the house emblems I managed to get was all 4 Gryffindor, Ravenclaw, Hufflepuff and Slytherin, and they all came out really good. The detail on there was incredible when they came off the printer, and again I think it was down to my dryer. And all I did was glue these onto the front of the desk, covering up the extra hole that I drilled for originally having an extra switch what I didn't actually need, and I think it covered it up pretty well, and the front of the desk ended up looking really good in my opinion. Now it was time to finally piece this PC together, and I finally turned it on, and wow, I was so happy with the result. Now all I need to do is wait for Hogwarts Legacy to be released and do some benchmark testing. Let's see how this PC performs. I have not monetized yet on YouTube, and I have no sponsors, so this video was completely self-funded by myself. So if you want to see me hacking up pieces of history to turn it into stuff that we use today, then I'd really appreciate your support. Now I hope you enjoy this montage of this gaming PC.